So for those of you that do not do pediatric research, it's important to point out that the reason why it's so important is that up to 90% of the medicine that we use in children are used off-label, meaning that it is used in a formulation, a dose, or an age group that's not FDA approved. It's about 50% in the outpatient setting and can be upwards of 99% in our NICU and our PICU settings. We also need to understand the fact that kids metabolize drugs differently than adults do. So some of the drugs that we've studied actually get metabolized faster, which means that we need to dose them more frequently and maybe in higher doses. Sometimes the drugs get metabolized slower, which means that we could overdose them if we use the adult dosage. And obviously, it does result in ineffective dosing or overdosing. And then some conditions only exist in children, such as prematurity. And we also like to look at the development of their immune systems and things like that because we can't study those types of things in adults. We need to really understand how medicines can affect a child's growth and development. So how does putting a child on an attention deficit disorder medication affect their growth if they start at age 6 versus if they start at age 10? What does that do to them? We also are looking for finding improved treatments for existing diseases that are more effective or maybe have less side effects. So adding the pertussis component to the 11 and 12-year-old vaccine schedule due to the whooping cough outbreaks that we see in younger children. Looking at a 2-week injection for juvenile rheumatoid arthritis instead of children who have to undergo injections every 2 days. And anti-epileptic medications actually have significant cognitive effects. So we want to look at those to look at what medications can have fewer cognitive effects in children. And then we're also looking at the potential of, do we need chickenpox boosters because there's so many adults now getting shingles. So those are the types of things that we need to be looking at. So in 1970, the average age of death for a child born with cystic fibrosis was 8 years of age. Today, 90% of babies that are born with CF are expected to reach the age of 40. So that's all as a result of the research that's being done in this area. So Dr. Karen McCoy, who is at Children's, has actually been a large part of many of the treatment studies and the things that have been done in cystic fibrosis, and we're seeing a significant increase. We still see adult patients at Children's, and so when I see a 40-year-old man in our unit being tested for a research study, it's kind of odd because we're used to seeing little kids running around. Childhood cancer survival rates have risen from around 30% in 1960 to over 80% in recent years due to the introduction of chemotherapy and combination treatments. And then premature babies are usually born with RDS, which is respiratory distress syndrome, leading cause of death in these infants. And that's due to the fact that their body cannot make enough surfactant. And without that, their lungs are stiff, they collapse, they have difficulty breathing, fluid builds up. So there was a synthetic form that was introduced that we can squirt directly into the breathing tube. This has drastically reduced mortality rates in these children. So these are the types of things that have changed in pediatric care due to the research that's been done. Due to the Best Pharmaceuticals Act in children, as well as the Pediatric Research Equity Act, there have been over 405 pediatric studies, and it's resulted in numerous safety data for drugs that we routinely use in pediatrics. So it actually gives us the safety data that we don't have. So for parents, and I have a child who is now 20, anytime that I would take her to the pediatrician and they would write her a prescription, it was like they were doing their own research experiment with her because they didn't have safety data on many of the drugs that she would take. So having this kind of data is very important. It lets us know exactly what dose to give, and it lets us know exactly what side effects we can expect to see in children, not what side effects we see in adults. So things like Ritalin, Lunesta, everolimus, cisapride, things like that that we routinely use, we now exactly can see the safety profile. Vaccines. Obviously, the introduction of the meningitis vaccine for children before they go to college. Needed to know, can we give it at the same time that we give other vaccines? Does it have to be given alone? How does it affect the immune profile if you give it with other vaccines? The introduction of the HPV vaccine, and can we give it during that 11-12 vaccine series? the liquid polio vaccine versus the injectable. So we wanted to get rid of the number of shots that children were getting. Turns out that the liquid polio vaccine is not as effective, so we needed to go back to the injectable. So we couldn't save them a shot in that case. And then how many of you got your flu vaccine this year? Okay, good. How many of you chose the flu mist squirt up the nose? Okay, so a few of you. So with the introduction of the flu mist, actually the incidence of people getting their flu vaccine has risen significantly. Why? Because people don't like to get shots. So that's why it's gone up a lot. And obviously we want to, again, reduce the number of shots that kids get. And so this has been helpful in that vein. Now, there's a lot of ethical implications when you do pediatric research, and I think that's one of the things that we struggle with in our area. The more innovative the studies we do, the more difficult the ethics become. So the sicker the patient, the more likely they are to want to enroll. They've tried everything else, so this is their last hope. How do you make sure you get really good informed consent in that situation? How do you make sure they really understand? Okay. Should we pay children to participate in research? What do you guys think? Should we pay them? $5 to a little kid can be a whole lot of money, right? And $50 to a family who doesn't have enough to pay their electric bill can be a lot of money. So the whole idea around incentives, and especially for pediatric studies, can be tricky. I think the biggest thing that we struggle with a lot of times is, what if the child says, no, I don't want to participate, but their parent really wants them to? Is there a difference if it's a life-saving treatment study versus a survey study? What if they're 9 versus 16? It's very, very different. And so you have to take those things into consideration. I mean, I don't know too many kids that run around and go, hey, pick me, I want my blood drawn. I want a bone marrow transplant. I want to do that. So those are the types of things that we have to really take into consideration. A lot of times we involve social work to make sure that the kids really understand what's going on and that we can make sure that we get proper assent for them. One of the other things that's difficult, especially in the teen population, is what if our study involves asking questions about drug use? We have a 15-year-old participant who discloses that they have been huffing regularly and have even blacked out a couple of times. Do you tell the parent? Depends on what your consent form says. Okay, and those are the types of things that can get really, really tricky. Sometimes I'm like, bring on an adult study because we won't have to deal with these types of things. But then adults can have their own issues. So, so we like kids a lot better. And my nurses always say, you can give me my kids back anytime. So, so these are the types of things, and this is an actual incident that happened to us, and we really struggled with this. We've actually had also issues with teens being pregnant and things of that nature, and having to figure out, do we tell their parents and things like that. So the language in the consent form needs to be very important. It needs to be there and very clear. How do you get true informed consent when a parent fears losing their child if they don't participate? How do you get informed consent in an emergency or critical care situation? And this is really tricky. I'm not saying that it's not tricky in adult situations either, because then you have to deal with spouses and or family members. I think there's just a different feel to it when it comes to your child. So we recently participated in a trial where children had experienced cardiac arrest, and we had to approach their parents about cooling them to determine if cooling them would help to lessen the neurocognitive effects that we often see after children are at a loss of oxygen for a period of time. And I sent one of my coordinators to do this study because she was very grandmotherly. And frankly, that's what they needed, is they needed somebody who could be very supportive and could talk them through it and could really be able to be that person to develop that kind of rapport, because in that situation, you can't send the wrong person in to try to consent. So juggling those ethical implications are difficult for some of the staff some of the times, which I'm sure that you all face that do adult research as well. So how is pediatric research different? So I like to say that it means that we have to convince the parent and the child that the study is worth participating in. Also, pediatric research can impact the entire family. We have done some studies that involve changing the diet for the child. You can't change the diet for one kid and not change it for the rest of the family. It just does not work. So the one child who can't eat Twinkies, no one else in the family can either. So it affects the whole family. And the whole family has to be on board in some respects. Children are considered a vulnerable population, so we have additional safeguards and regulations that must be followed. We also have to write our assent forms at a 5th grade reading level. And I can tell you that that is very, very difficult to get that language down to 5th grade when you are trying to describe an investigational treatment study for children diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and or epilepsy and or name any other condition. So trying to get that language down to 5th grade is tough. So the IRB also has to spend more energy and time when considering what risk level they assign to the study because of the vulnerable population designation. What risk level they assign impacts our informed consent process and how we do it. We're governed by the Code of Federal Regulations, 45 CFR 46, and the risk level subpart D. So what are they? So risk level 1, minimum risk. Risk level 2, more than minimum risk, but offers prospect of benefit or well-being. Risk level 3, more than minimum risk and no prospect of benefit or well-being. The kicker with this one is that we require both parent signatures. And this one can throw us for a logistical loop. Risk level 4, the local IRB cannot decide. It's usually high risk, but may offer a global benefit referred to, they refer it up to the Department of Health and Human Services or the Food and Drug Administration. So I've been at Children's for about 25 years, and we have had a couple of these come through. So we don't see very many risk level 4s. Risk level 1 and 2 requires one parent. Risk level 3, both parents have to sign the consent form unless they meet one of these criteria. One parent's deceased, one parent's unknown, one parent is incompetent, one parent is not reasonably available, one parent has full legal custody. And not reasonably available does not mean that dad works 12 to 16 hours a day and doesn't want to come in for the visit. We're not allowed to get around that. So we have gone and met a dad or a mom at their job. We have tried to come up with alternative meeting arrangements after work, at the home, things of that nature so that we can get that second consent. So as all of you know, informed consent is a process. It's not just a form. Our IRB likes to say that informed consent starts from the second the subject sees the ad until you sit down and approach them in the ED waiting room or your clinic or wherever you're going to consent them. It's providing a clear explanation of the research and procedures. It can be written or oral. It's good to be creative. It's the opportunity for an exchange of questions. It's really important not to be pushy. And it's critical that you are providing them with enough information that the subject and parent can make an informed decision. If informed consent takes you less than 20 minutes, you're doing it incorrectly. What is assent? Confirmation that the minor agrees to participate, and by not saying no, that doesn't mean that they're saying yes. We need them to actually verbalize that they want to participate in the study. We can waive assent if the child is maybe developmentally 5 but chronologically 9. We just have to document it and have some documentation behind that from the family. If they turn 9 while they're in a study, the child must sign the assent. So the age of assent varies depending on what institution you are at. So some institutions, the age of assent goes down to 7. Nationwide Children's has chosen 9. I think 7 can be a little bit young to really get a kid to understand. Even 9 can be difficult at times. It just depends on what you're trying to get them to understand, I guess. Minors cannot give legal consent to participate in research unless they've been emancipated. So we run into the situation a lot of times where a mother is 16 years old, she's given birth to a baby, and we would like to enroll the baby into the study. So we have to then get grandma, if we are collecting any data on the mother as well, things like that. So there can be situations where you're also involving the grandparents if the child has given birth to a baby and they're also a minor. So different methods for obtaining informed consent. You can do the one-on-one. We have participated in doing group consent. We did a large meningitis study, vaccine study several years ago where we had college students coming in, and so we would put 5 or 6 of them in a room. We would explain the study to them, and then we would take them individually into a room, ask them if they had any questions, and then get their signature. So in studies where you're doing large volume recruiting and enrolling, that can work and it can save you some time. Videotapes have worked, visual aids to make sure that people understand. We also use a comprehension quiz at Children's for our studies that we run through Clinical Research Services. So it asks the family questions such as, what is the purpose of the study? What risk will what are the potential risks of this study? Who is the PI of the study? Things of that nature. There's about 5 questions on the comprehension questionnaire. And they fill it out after we've gone over consent with them and after we've given them opportunity to read it and that sort of thing. And then we go over their quiz with them to make sure that they haven't answered anything incorrectly that we need to review with them, just to make sure that they understand. There's often times where we have gone through the informed consent process and we think we've done a really good job, and then they come back at visit 2 and say, well, I didn't know I was going to be in this study for 6 months, or I didn't know my kid was going to have all these procedures, and then you go through it again with them and make sure that they understand and things like that. So consent comprehension quizzes can be a good idea. And then there are electronic methods, which I'll go into in a minute. So regardless of what method you use, obviously, you need to make sure that the subject has an adequate amount of time to get the information that they need to make an informed decision. And for us with pediatrics, we need to also make sure that we've given the kid an ample amount of time and opportunity to ask any questions they have, be able to explain it to them on their level, and also let them not be swayed by maybe mom and dad wanting them to participate when they don't want to. So we've had situations where we had a 16-year-old boy come in with his mom, and we were doing a depression study, and he comes in and the coordinator is explaining to him about the study, and he looks at his mom and he says, you didn't tell me this is why I was coming in. I'm not depressed. I don't want to do this. And he's about 175 and he's almost 6 foot tall, and his mom says, well, you have to do this, you must be in this study. And they start having this sort of exchange back and forth, and so we pulled mom out of the room and she said, well, he needs it, this is definitely what he needs, this is definitely what's going on with him. And so we talked to her and we said, he's not going to go through with what he needs to do for this study. He's 16 years old. If he doesn't want to take the medicine, he's not going to take it. If he doesn't want to come back for appointments, it's going to be a struggle every step of the way. So this is not something that we can force him to do. So they ended up leaving and it ended up being okay. But those are the types of situations that you definitely face if there's not good congruency between the family and what they've expected them to do. So kids need to understand, parents need to understand, and they need to be on the same page. So electronic platforms are becoming more frequent, and they're kind of the new thing. And so one of the things that we're doing at Nationwide Children's is Paula Dennis and myself have worked together for a long time at Nationwide Children's, and about 7 years ago we were at a conference and we were talking and we were like, this would be a great idea if we could do a consent form that was electronic and was easier for the parents to understand, and blah, 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 blah. And so it's taken us 7 years from idea to prototype, and it's a collaboration between our department and our research IT, and now we have a electronic consent form, which is on a mobile iOS application. It's completely regulatory compliant. We can store PHI. It's secure on there. There is an option for it to read to the subject so that it allows for different types of learning. It has multilingual capabilities, and it's also kid-friendly. So it leads you through with an avatar, and so you can pick how you want the avatar to look. And then for kids, it's an animal avatar, and they get to pick what animal they would like to use. And so it's electronic, it's interactive, and we have videos that we have embedded of different procedures, such as an EKG or getting a blood draw and things like that, so they can see that, so that it's not so scary for them. And we've created games within it of different procedures as well, so that they can play with the different procedures and have the different procedures done to the avatar. And so it really does provide a streamlined approach. So what we have created is this electronic consent form, but it also has our source documents loaded right onto the iPad, and then we've created the same data fields in REDCap, so that as we obtain consent, we fill out the data fields with the families, either at the bedside or in the clinic, and then it shoots the data directly over to REDCap. So it makes it very staff-friendly and cuts down on our staff time as well. We initiated our pilot project first quarter of 2015, and we are doing a larger scale pilot, which will be all of the children's hospitals in Ohio, which will be fall of 2015 for pediatric pneumonia. So we're excited about that. We're excited to look at what data we get and to see if it actually improves comprehension, if families actually like it better and things like that. And then we'll be going larger scale after that. So our hope is that it will increase understanding and comprehension for our research subjects, that it will help to increase regulatory compliance with federal regulations. So it doesn't allow you to skip pages. It forces the families to initial on every page, which is a requirement at Nationwide Children's. And then it won't send to you or anything if people haven't signed off on it. We've also embedded comprehension questions throughout, and it will take them back if they answered something incorrectly. We can make it adaptable for any research study, so once the template's been built, then it's just a matter of putting in the new verbiage that's needed for the different studies that we do. And we have made sure that it's adaptable for multiple cultures and participants with disabilities, so the ability to read to you, the multilingual capability, that type of thing. And we hope that it's going to complement multiple learning styles. So some people learn by writing, some people learn by reading, some people learn by being read to, so that's our hope through this. And a lot of times we do not enroll people of other languages because we can't afford to get our consents translated into the languages that we need to, and we can't afford to get all of the different documents translated into different languages. So we're hoping that by doing things of this nature that we'll be able to create more of a generalizable knowledge base, because we're able to enroll people of all cultures and not just English speaking. So that's our goal. So in summary, informed consent process is complex for all of us. In pediatrics, it just has a couple of nuances. The more complex our research gets, the more complex the informed consent process becomes. Our sponsors often see consent forms as extensions of the contracts, and after you put all of the required elements in there and what the sponsor wants, the consent form looks like a 20-page document, and it's at a college reading level, and it is a tricky thing to fight with them to get it to something that is really understandable to the subjects. So getting them to understand that they can sue us if they fall down on the sidewalk, and this reading like a contract is not going to save them from that, can be a difficult negotiation. I think making sure that we're all looking towards innovative solutions to ensure that we get true informed consent, and looking for methods that maximize that efficiency are important in this business. So anything that we can do to make sure that our subjects understand what we are asking them to sign up for is important. So that's it. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
So this electronic form, the coordinator or research staff would have to be present to answer any questions. So interactive with the iPad, but also with somebody present, right?
Right.
Okay.
Now, I just was at a conference in April, and one of the new FDA guidances has come out where it's allowing us to get informed consent in electronic methods where you might not have to be present in a more electronic form. They put something out for people to respond to. And I struggle with that a little bit being in this business because I think we lose a little bit of that opportunity for people to ask questions and make sure that they're really getting the nuances of it. So it might be okay for survey studies or observational studies and things like that, but I would worry if we don't have that interaction for interventional studies or treatment studies. But yeah, so we do that interaction. So we would talk to them and explain it to them just like we always do, and then turn the iPad over to them and then let them do their thing. And then when it's time for them to consent and actually sign through it, then we go back in the room and say, you know, what questions do you have? And then we walk through it with them on signing it.
Do you have preliminary data from the pilot study yet?
Not yet. I wish that we did. So we're doing it in an inpatient setting right now, and so the recruitment for that particular condition has now waned. So now we're going to have to wait for it to peak again, and then we'll be back up because that's the only template that we built. So the Ohio Pneumonia Project, I think that will give us a little bit more data as far as how usable it is for other people and how adaptable it can become. So we're going to use a reliant IRB model for this so that we can actually just load the iPads and give it to the other pediatric sites so that they can have their source data and their consent forms right on it and things like that. But I think that in the long run, the utility of this is to make it so that it's completely adaptable and it's easy to adapt. So you can adapt it, I can adapt it, you can adapt it, those types of things. So, or institutions can adapt it for the templates that they use.
Well, thank you very much, Grace.
Thanks.